Hey, what's up? I'm Norris and welcome back. Now today I'll be filling in for Wifey So Long for her latest Simplicity drop, which is 9822. And today we'll be working on view B, which is the wide leg jumpsuit. Let's get started. Okay, so again, like I said, we're using Mimi G style Simplicity pattern 9822, and we're working on view B, which is the wide leg pant. Now there's not much difference between the two. View A, you do have two pleats in the pant portion, and then on view B, you have like a regular traditional denim pocket situation. And then also one is snaps, one is buttons, but you can do either one. And on the back, if you look here, you have your suggested fabric types at the top and then notions. Now the notions, like I said, you'll need either snaps or buttons, and you'll need 11 if you decide to do either one. And then also at the bottom, don't forget that you have your finished garments measurements. Now this is really good to give you an idea of what the fit is going to be once you sew it all up, so you can get a more accurate sizing. Okay, so now that we have all the information with the pattern, once you cut all of your pattern pieces out of fabric, we can begin sewing. Okay, so first things first, let's go ahead and start with the front. Now this is the front piece. Your front pocket goes here, and then we have a flap, so that's what we're going to do now. And there I have two notches at the top and also at the bottom to indicate where to fold for the pleat. So with the wrong size touching, I'm going to match up my notches like this. I'm going to head to the machine. I'm going to stitch all the way down, which is going to create a pleat. All right, so do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, as you can see, I'm back from the machine, and it created a pleat once you press it down like this. And this is the back, and this is the front. Now, you can turn to one side of the pleat and edge stitch, and then stitch a 1/4 inch away from there. And then you can turn this side this way and do the same thing. That just give it a little top stitching detail on the actual pleat. But for this particular one, we're gonna keep it pretty plain right here when it comes to the top stitching. So the next step is, this is the top here, and I got a notch here, and I have a notch on this side to show where to fold, where the fold line is. Okay, so as you can see, the fold lines are right here. So I fold it back, and then at the top here, you can see that I pressed up a 1/4 inch. So you fold and then press up a 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to pin on both sides. Okay, so now when I head to the machine, I'm going to start on one side, and I'm going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here, pivot to across the bottom, and then up the other side. And then also while we're at the machine, we're going to work on our flap. So one should be interfaced and one shouldn't be interfaced. So we're right sides facing. Let me see, trying to find out which side is what. Okay, so right sides facing. We're going to take this to the machine as well. And I'm going to pin along the side, the bottom, and then the other side. So now while we're at the machine working on the pocket, we're going to stitch this down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance across the side, across the bottom, and then up the other side, leaving the top free. Okay, so let's go do all of that in the machine, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, we have the flap stitched. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the corners real quick, and then trim something down, trim some of that down from the side. Grab the point turner, turn this out. Okay. So you want to make sure the interface part is on top. You get us a really good press, and then you can just head back to the machine and edge stitch around, and then top stitch a 1/4 inch away from that first, giving it 2 rows of top stitching. Okay, and then now we have the pocket. I'm just going to trim some from the top here. And then I'm going to turn it right side out. Okay. So now that we have this flipped down, we're going to go ahead and take the seam allowance around the sides and then also the bottom like this and give it a really good press. Okay, so go ahead and press this and also press your flap. Come back and we'll continue. Okay, so I went ahead and pressed my pocket. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that 1/4 inch is still tucked underneath, and we're just going to top stitch across the pocket. That top stitch is going to encase the bottom. Just like this. And then now we're going to do top stitching on the flap. First, we're just going to edge stitch around, and then we're going to come back and do a 1/4 inch of top stitching away from the first one. Okay, and then now I'm going to go and do one more top stitching a 1/4 inch away from the first one. Okay, as you can see, we have the pocket. We're going to go ahead and place them right in between our two markings. I'm going to pin. Okay. And then now for our flap, we're going to turn it with the wrong side up. And I like to mark the seam allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch. Okay, now this right here is going to be my visible stitching line, and that's going to go right in between those two markings here. So you want that stitching line to be right there with the flap markings. So basically when you flip it down, it'll be perfectly in place. So now let me go ahead and pin that as well. Okay, so now just head to your machine. You're just going to edge stitch around the pocket once, and then you're going to come back a second time with 2 rows of top stitching, the same as we did our flap here, and that's going to stitch our pocket, our patch pocket down. And then after that, we're just going to do that stitching line right there on the flap. So do all of that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back, and you see the 2 rows of top stitching here, and I have the flap stitched down. Now I'm just going to trim this down to about 3/8 or a 1/4 inch. Okay, so now that that's trimmed off with that little seam allowance, we can flip it down, give it a good press, and then now you can top stitch it using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and also while we're at the machine too, we can go ahead and form our pleats at the bottom of our front. So the pleats are going to go outward. So basically you want to take, you should have markings indicating where your pleats are. So mine's are here and here. So I'm going to go ahead and just fold that pleat outward. And then I'm going to pin. This is the second one. Do the same exact thing. Okay. And when we at the machine top stitching this across, you can go ahead and base this in place. Okay, so we're back for the machine. Went ahead and base across the pleats. We have our pocket and our flap stitched down onto the front. So once you do one, you want to do the other one the same exact way. But I do need to mention, if you are doing the buttonholes, you do need to do the buttonholes before you place your flap on. So if you haven't gotten to that step yet and you want to do buttonholes, you want to make sure you do your buttonholes before placing your flap on. Now, once we do that, we're going to put this to the side for just a moment, and we're going to work on our back pieces. Now here are our 2 back pieces here. So right sides facing, we're going to put them together in the center back. We should have 2 notches here. Okay, so now just head to the machine. We're going to stitch across the center back using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. I went ahead and stitched them both together. And then I trimmed my seam allowance using a serger, or you can use peeking shears or a zigzag stitch if you want to get a clean finish, or you can do flat felt seams. That's a little bit more work, but it will make it look nice and clean underneath. But I did it with serge and I pressed it to one side. And as you can see, I did my 2 rows of top stitching, one on the edge and then the other one a 1/4 inch away from that first one. We're going to be doing this a lot. So when I say do your double row of top stitching, this is exactly what I mean, just so I won't have to be explaining it every single time. So now as you can see, you see the shape of the back, this right here where the arms at, and these are the side seams. And now we're going to attach our back yoke. So now this is the back yoke here, right side's facing. I'm going to turn it upside down so we can match the double notches here. And this one right here is the second one. We're going to be stitching this on at the same exact time. So you want the right side to be facing up. So right side to wrong side of your back. And we're just going to sandwich your back piece in between your 2 back yoke layers. So you want to match up your double notches for all 3 layers. And you want to pin there. Okay, so now let's just head to the machine and we're going to stitch all the way across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, we have our 2 yokes at the top here, and then the back is sandwiched in between the 2. Now this is a different method if you're looking at the written instructions. I'm doing it just a bit different because I like the cleanness of the shoulders once we finish this up. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to take the yoke that's on the bottom and flip it down. Okay, but we're going to flip the other one, the top, back up. Okay, so you can see the one on the bottom is down, and then this is the top one. So this is the right side of the back, and this is the right side of the top yoke. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our front pieces, and with right sides facing, we're going to align them up at the shoulders, just like this. And once again, right sides are facing. I'm just going to pin just to keep this in place for right now. Okay, so now we're going to roll the back and also the front together, just like this, leaving the bottom back yoke still facing down. Okay, so once I get here, so now we're going to take the bottom yoke and we're going to align it. And then now we're sandwiching the front in between the yokes. Okay, so just like that. Okay, so now we're going to head to the machine. We're going to stitch across both shoulders using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so once you do one shoulder, you want to do the other one the same exact way. Okay, so we're back from the machine. I'm gonna go ahead and trim some of this bottom seam allowance and then also from the shoulder. And then we're gonna roll it out and let you see the difference. Okay, so now we're just going to pull this out. Okay, so now we have the shoulders and front seam allowance encased like this, and we got a nice clean finish on the inside. So now what we're going to do is give this a really good press, and once again we're going to do our 2 rows of top stitching here across one shoulder, the other shoulder, and then across the back yoke in the back. And then we're going to be making our pleats across the bottom. So we're going to make the pleats going outward. So you want to look at your pleat markings, and then you want to meet them like this, pin, and then your second one. Okay, now that we have this pin, while you're at the machine doing your top stitching, you want to go ahead and baste your pleats in place. Okay, so I'm back from the machine. You see the pleats are in place, and then I did all my top stitching right here on the yoke. And then now what we're going to do is going to put it to the side for just a moment, and we're going to work on our sleeve. So as you can see right here, you should have a little marking on your pattern piece that you should transfer, and you should just stitch along that stitching line. All right, and this right here is right sides facing up, just so you know. So after you do that stitching, you want to make a clip right in the center, but don't go through your stitching. Okay, just like that. All right, now you want to take your continuous lap, which is pattern piece number 7, and you want to put the right side of this to the wrong side of your sleeve. So now I'm going to open this up a little bit, right side along the wrong side. So you should be looking at both of the right sides. Also on this side here, you can stitch a 1/4 inch away from the edge, and you can line both of your stitching up, but I can visually see how much a 1/4 inch is, so I don't really have to do that myself. And then in the center, you want to make sure the center is a 1/4 inch away from there, the pin there. Okay, so it should look just like this. The bottom should look like this, and the top is like this. So now we're going to head to the machine, and we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch away, leaving this flat like this, a 1/4 inch away, all the way down. So as you can see, from the edge of my actual continuous lap to the stitching right here on my sleeve, that should be a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to keep it at that 1/4 inch distance all the way through. Okay, so using that stitching as a guide leaves you with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then now we're just going to take this to your pressing table and give it a good press. And you want your seam allowance to be pressed towards your continuous lap. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, we have the continuous lap attached to our sleeve, and you can see I pressed the seam allowance towards the continuous lap. And then on the other end, the end that we did not stitch on the continuous lap, you want to turn that in and give it a good press, a 1/4 inch. Turn it in a 1/4 inch, give it a good press. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to take the folded edge and we're going to place it just right there across where the stitching is. And then I'm going to pin. Okay. Make sure you keep the middle lined up. Just like that. Now we're going to head over to the machine and we're going to add stitch right there on that fold all the way down. Okay, now that we're back from the machine, this right here is the right side. You see the one notch, that's the front of my sleeve, and then you see the double notch, that's the back. That's how you know that this is the back. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna tuck that to the inside like this. And then we're gonna pin this in place so we can base it down later. And then now we're going to work on that pleat. So now you want to take your pleat and you want to go towards the underlap and then pin that in place. So now what we're going to do is just go ahead and just base this down here. And then while we're at the machine, we want to come under here, and you just want to stitch diagonally from the corner here, just on this corner, up and down right there. Okay, so this is the corner here. So basically you just want to stitch a couple of times. Just like that. And then now we're just going to turn to a basting stitch. And we're going to base the pleat down, and we're going to base the underlap fold to the inside. Only on the front side. Okay, as you can see, we have our pleat in place and then our continuous lap done. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our sleeves and attach them to our front. Okay, so our front and back. So you want to go right sides facing, and then you want to line up your one notch to the front where you see that one notch at, and then your two notches to the back, and you want to pin. Okay, now that we have it pinned, we're just going to head to the machine and stitch, starting on one end, going all the way to the other end using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to serge that seam, but like I said, you can do flat felt seams or cut with pinky shears or use a zigzag stitch to clean off that edge before we do top stitching on the other side. So once you do one sleeve, you want to do the other sleeve the same exact way and then pin it to the other side and stitch across just like this. Okay, so moving right along, as you can see, both the sleeves are put on, and on the inside, I serge that sleeve and then a top stitch right here on the front and back side, not on the sleeve. Okay, you want to push your seam allowance towards the actual top. Okay, so now we're going to close out the sleeve and the underarm and the side seam. So you just want to turn it right sides facing. Then we're going to pin right here up under that underarm seam first. You don't want to be goofy and have that not lining up. Okay. You want to pin your other side the same exact way, and then head to the machine and stitch starting on one end all the way to the other end using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then you can finish your seams off the same way you've been doing the rest of them. Okay, so we're back from the machine. Our sleeves are almost done. We just got to put the cuff on. As you can see, I pressed my seams, and then I pressed out, and then on the inside, as you can see, the seams are pressed towards the back. So now we're going to focus on the cuffs. So with the cuff, there should be a notch on one side, and then the unnotched side, you want to turn that up the seam allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch, and then trim it down to a 1/4 inch, or maybe to a 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch. So once you do that, you want to match that notch up with your sleeve. Now if the notch don't match up, that means you have the cuff on the wrong side. So once you match it up, the cuff should extend from your sleeve, the seam allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch, okay? It did not supposed to match up exactly. It's supposed to stick out just a little bit. And then the same thing for the other side. You want to pin all the way to the back. And as you can see, the edge is 5/8 of an inch from here. So now just head to the machine and you want to stitch starting on one end of your sleeve and go all the way to the other end, and then come back and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, the cuff is stitched on here, and now we can trim that cuff down a little bit, at least to 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to fold your cuff onto itself. It should be a fold line, and then basically just like this, and you want that fold to be right up against that seam. Put a couple of pins in it. Okay, so now let's head to the machine. You're gonna stitch right across here using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to close out the side, and then the same thing to the other side. And now you wanna do your other cuff the same way. Trim, fold back, and stitch. Okay, now we just trim that seam allowance down on both sides. Now we're gonna turn those corners right side out. Okay, so after you give this a really good press, you want to pin from the right side right through the seam, just like this, but you want to be catching that fold underneath. Okay, so when we stitch in the ditch, meaning we're going to stitch right in the center of that seam, it's going to catch that and it's going to close out the cuff. So let's head to the machine and let's stitch in the ditch. Also, while you're here at the machine, you can do your 2 rows of stitching, of top stitching. Okay, and then you can do your second row a 1/4 inch away from the first one, and you're all done outside of doing your buttonholes if you're doing buttons or adding your snaps. Okay, so we have the cuff complete. As you can see right here, got all the top stitching and all the details. And then now we're gonna work on the midriff. So for right now, I'm gonna put the uninterfaced one to the side for just a moment, and we're only gonna work on the interface side. So right side's facing, what we're gonna do is, gonna align it at the ends and also at all the notches. And then before we head to the machine and do anything, we're going to take your uninterfaced midriff piece, and on one side we're going to press up the seam allowance, okay, which is 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so go ahead to your pressing table, give this a good press, come back and we'll continue. Okay, now that I'm back, gave this a good press, I'm going to trim it down to about 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so now on the inside, we're going to put the uninterfaced midriff right sides to wrong side facing. Okay, basically we're going to sandwich the bottom of the top, and I'm just going to repin. Now you can go to the machine and baste one at a time, but I found this easier, save you some time. Just pin it and then stitch it all together with one stitch. Okay, so let's head to the machine, making sure that we have all 3 layers lined up, and we're just going to stitch on one end, going all the way through to the other end using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, I went ahead and pressed my seam allowance towards the midriff, and I went ahead and edge stitch, and then I did another row of top stitching a 1/4 inch away from that one, and you can see how it looks on the inside and then the outside. So this is going to be the inside midriff. Okay, so now I'm going to put this to the side. We're going to work on our pant pieces. Okay, so with right sides facing, we're going to work on front pocket. This the lining with right sides facing. We're going to pin. Okay, so then we're going to start here and stitch all the way here using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you want to come back and we'll continue. Okay, so I went ahead and stitched, and then also did some understitching when you stitch close to the seam on the lining part all the way around. And then I'm just going to trim that down. Okay. So now we can head to your pressing table and give this a really good press. And once you press it really nicely, you want to do your 2 rows of top stitching, 1 edge stitched and then 1 1/4 inch away from the first one. So let me lay it down. Okay, so you'll have your 2 rows right here. Go ahead and do that. And then also we're going to prep our corn pocket. Now this corn pocket can go on the left side or the right side. I chose for it to go on the left. And basically what you want to do, you should have a fold line at the top. You want to press a 1/4 inch and then press another 1/4 inch. And then you want to take this to the machine and you want to edge stitch across the top and then a 1/4 inch away from the first stitch. And then after you do that, you can press 5/8 of an inch on your sides and then also your bottom. All right. So go ahead and do that and we'll come prep this to stitch it onto our pocket facing. So let's head to the machine, do all of that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so I'm back from the pressing table and also the machine. As you can see, we have our 2 rows of top stitching here. And then on the back, you'll see the lining that looks like this. So for the corn pocket, if you're looking at the instructions, I'm doing it a little bit different because this is more of a traditional corn pocket finish. And like I said, I press the sides and then also the bottom 5/8 of an inch. And then now we can just line that up where our markings are at. And you're just gonna head to the machine and stitch this down, once edge stitched, and then a second row of top stitching a 1/4 inch away from there. All right, so go ahead and do that. Come back and we'll finish up our pocket. Okay, as you can see, I have the corn pocket stitched right on. And then now what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna line this up. You should have a marking right there where this should line up at. And then a marking right here. And then I'm gonna flip it over to the back. And now I'm just going to be working on the lining and the pocket facing. I'm gonna pin. And there should be a notch at the bottom. Okay. The very first thing I'm gonna do, I'm actually pinning like this so I can see the lining, with the lining up. So I'm gonna start on one side, stitch, pivot, and then stitch this way right here. And we're gonna use 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I'm gonna serge that seam. Okay, so I'm back. You see the serge. And then now I'm gonna turn it around and we're going to line up that side seam. And we're gonna be basting from here to keep everything in place. And then on this side here, I'm gonna pin. We're gonna be basting right here just across the top. And then if you transfer all your markings, you should have 2 dots right here. We're going to put this here and we're basically going to edge stitch at that bottom dot up to the dot here. Okay? And that's going to be 5/8 of an inch away from the edge. Okay, so do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so we're all done with the front pockets. When you do one, you want to do the other one the same exact way. And then also, there should be a dot that you should transfer, and you should stitch the seam allowance with a basting stitch, going about 1.5 inches away from the dot, and then when you get to the dot, pivoting here. And then right in the middle of that pivot, where that dot is, you want to clip to your stitching, but not through it. And then you'll get this, and then you want to do the other one the same way. Okay, so now we're just gonna put that to the side for just a moment, and then now we're gonna take your back piece, and we're gonna do the dart. So I already got mine folded and pinned. You should have transferred your dart, and just basically you put You pin through one and then go through the other side. And then now we're going to start at the top, back stitch at the top. And then when you get to your point, you want to pull your threads, tie a knot to finish it off. So go ahead and do your dart for both of your back pieces and we'll continue. Okay, so I'm back from the machine. I did both darts to both sides of my backs and I pressed the dart towards the center back. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take one of my fronts. I got one of my fronts and I got one of my back pieces. And we're just going to pin on that inside seam. Okay, so super easy, just do a straight stitch. You want to start at the top, go all the way down to the hem using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then you want to take your other back and your other front, right sides facing, and do the same exact thing. Okay, so I'm back from the machine. As you can see, I went ahead and serged my seam here and I pressed it towards the back. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to take our remaining front and back and we're right sides facing. We're going to pin right in the center. So we're going to pin right at the crotch first, making sure that that seam matches up. I want to line up. Okay. So now just head to the machine. We're going to stitch starting here, going all the way until we get to the other side here using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you can go ahead and clean up that seam allowance. I'm going to be serging like I've been doing. You can do exactly what you've been doing, and then we're going to come back and continue. Okay, as you can see, I went ahead and cleaned up that seam allowance, and then I did some top stitching on the other side. So if I turn it this way, you'll see my 2 rows of top stitching all the way through to the back. Just like that. And then now we're going to turn it right sides facing again and we're going to stitch our outside seams. Okay, so I'm just going to work on one pant leg now, put a couple of pins in here. Okay, so now we're going to head to the machine. We're going to stitch starting one end all the way down to the hem using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you want to do your other pant leg the same exact way. And then we'll start connecting the bottom to the top. Okay, so we're back from the machine. Went ahead and closed out the side seam. And I cleaned up that seam and pressed it towards the back. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the top to the bottom. So now you see the top, we're going to turn it upside down like this. And working on one side, we have the interfaced portion lined up with the pants, and we're just going to pin there. Okay, so you want to make sure that we have your other part of your midriff out the way, and working on just this side, we're going to stitch all the way across to the other side using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you want to do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, as you can see, I went ahead and stitched that. Now I'm going to go ahead and just trim it down just a little bit. Okay. So now what we're going to do is you want to press that seam allowance towards the midriff, okay? Press it towards the top, and then you're going to overlap this. And then on this side, we're going to add stitch and then stitch again a 1/4 inch away, the same way we did to the top, and it's going to secure the inside. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, we have the midriff all completed. We got it edge stitched and then top stitch a 1/4 inch away from there. So now it's completely connected to the top and the bottom. Okay, so now we're going to take one of our plackets, and on the unnotched side, we have 2 notches right here, but this side right here is unnotched. So you want to press that down 5/8 of an inch and then trim it down to about 3/8 of an inch like I have it now. I've already trimmed this off. So if you haven't trimmed, you want to go ahead and trim now. So now let's go ahead and just turn this to the side for right now. So there are 2 notches here. We're going to put those 2 notches, line them up and pin. Okay, now down here at the corner, pay very close attention. Now there's that little corner we clipped into. Now you want to put that dot, that marking, right there where that corner is, and pin. So when we start, we're not going to go all the way to the end. We're going to start at the dot and go all the way up until we get to the top. So you want to go ahead and press up and trim the unnotched part on the other side and pin it on the other side the same exact way. Now go ahead and stitch this down and we'll continue. Okay, so there go your marking. You want to put your needle right there. Okay, so moving right along, as you can see, we have our placket stitched onto the front, and then the bottom looks like this. As you can see, we stopped at that marking so it don't go all the way down, and then you have the little triangle here at the bottom. I went ahead and pressed my seam allowance towards my placket. So for right now, we're going to put it out the way, and we're going to work on our collar. Go ahead and press your seam allowance up towards the bottom of your collar. This is the front where you see the point up here. This is the bottom. You want to press up your seam allowance and trim that down to 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so right size facing, you want to take your unknitted side and we're going to pin. I'll show you with the interface one up. So right size facing, now we're going to go ahead and pin. All right, so now just go ahead and go to your machine. We're going to start on one side across the top and then down the other side, keeping the bottom free. So go ahead, do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. Let's go ahead and clip these corners. Okay, so now we're going to turn them right side out. Okay, so go ahead and give this a really good press and we're going to attach it to our jumpsuit. Okay, so my collar is turned right side out. I gave it a good press. And now we're right size facing. We're going to take the back of our jumpsuit at the neckline and we're going to attach it. You should have a dot. They should match up with the shoulders, with the shoulder seam. Just so you can see what you're looking at. And then now there should be a notch right there. Okay, so now you want to pay very close attention to what I'm showing you. So right here, we're going to start right here at the end of the collar, and then we're going to make our way all the way to the other end right there. You want to make sure you don't go past that. So you want to do that using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that, come back, and we'll continue. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, we have this stitched onto our jumpsuit. And then now we're going to, so first let me show you, there are 2 dots right here. There are 2 markings. So we're going to fold this at the fold line, matching up both dots. That dot is right before you get to the actual collar. So you want to make sure you have it in the right place. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to head to the machine and we're going to start at that dot and stitch to the edge here. Okay. So here to here on both sides. Okay, so now we're back from the machine. I'm gonna go ahead and clip to my stitching. And then I'm gonna go ahead and trim this down. You see that? Basically cutting that corner off. So now this part turns to the outside, point that corner out. Then this portion, that's gonna go up under the collar like that. And that's how it's basically going to get finished, okay? But now let's trim some of this seam allowance off before we continue. Don't trim off too much, just a little bit. Okay, so now we trimmed it off. We're gonna tuck that seam allowance on the inside, and we're going to pin on the outside like we've done before. And then we're gonna stitch in the ditch, catching underneath, okay? Okay, so once again, you wanna take this over to your machine, stitch in the ditch all the way, meaning stitch right in the center of that collar and back seam, and it's gonna catch that fold underneath. Okay, so do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, as you can see, I have my collar secured and it's nicely done. By stitching in the ditch, it closed out the inside. And then now for our plackets, let me unpin this. I went ahead and pressed and pinned, so I'm just gonna do this. So now that this is caught underneath, you just want to take your placket, the fold edge, and place it right up against that seam, okay? Right where you see that stitching it. And then give it a good press, and then you just want to pin it on one side. We're not going to stitch in the ditch, we're just going to edge stitch. Okay, so now you want to head to the machine, and we're just going to edge stitch, and that edge stitch is going to catch the fold underneath. So let's go ahead and do that, come back and we'll continue. And then now you want to go back down to a second row, a 1/4 inch away from this one. And then you want to do the same exact thing to this side here. Okay, as you can see, we back from the machine. I did all of my top stitching here, and then all of my top stitching here. That first edge stitch secures the inside, okay? So now we have to secure this bottom right here. So it's going to be the right side over the left. And before we continue, if you're doing buttons, you want to go ahead and make your buttonholes on your right side. It'll be pretty difficult if you do all of this. So you want to go ahead and make sure you knock that out right now. But I'm doing snaps, so I can go ahead and do this. Okay, so now we're going to close out the bottom. Let's go ahead and take the right side. And turn it upside down like this. Okay. So now this right here is the right side, and the right side is overlapped on that little triangle. And right now we're going to go to the machine, and right here in the corner of that triangle, we're going to start and then stitch on the other side of the triangle, okay? So let's go ahead and base this down, come back and we'll continue. And it's only the right side, and we push the seam allowance facing up. Now we're going to take this over to the table and see if our midriff lines up before we continue. Okay, so before we go ahead and continue and sandwich in the middle triangle there with the left side, you want to go ahead and just pin in place. And we're going to test it out. Now flip this up. Now this is your front. Now let's see if everything lines up. Okay. Okay. It seems like this is going to line up pretty good. This is what we're going to focus on right here. We just want to make sure the midriff here matches up on this side and then also that side. Okay, so now we can go back to the inside. Okay, since there's a pin here, you could mark this and then just stitch across, but if you turn it to this side, we already have a stitching line, okay? So you can just unpin it and then follow your existing stitch. So go ahead and do that, come back and we'll continue. Okay, so now that we have everything stitched down, we'll go ahead and trim this down to about 1/4 inch. And then now you want to turn everything to the right side. Actually, I might have trimmed a little bit too much. You might want to trim it down about 1/2 inch. Maybe not as much as I just did. But now you want to go back to your machine and just do your last 2 top stitching. So you want to top stitch close to the seam here. And then you want to top stitch 1/4 inch away from that seam. Okay? So once you do that, come back and we'll finish everything up. All right, so now we're just going to edge stitch real quick. And I had to take my sleeve off and like slide it in here. You know, it's kind of difficult to get in here. So make sure you back stitch at the beginning and also at the end. Tuck all that little seam allowance in there so it can get caught. All right, and then we do one more 1/4 inch away from that one. Okay, so we're back from the machine. As you can see, the bottom of the pocket has the 2 rows of top stitching. You want to be very careful because a lot of fabric there. So just make sure you use a heavier duty needle if you're having issues there. And the last thing you have to do is just give it a really good press, add your snaps, add all your buttons. And then last but not least, you want to do your hem and you're all done. All right, congratulations. Now, I hope you enjoyed this sew along and be sure to tag us on all social media so we can see your amazing makes.